Hi, we're Lina and Andy, two of the Bellroy co-founders, and What Have I Missed is a question we ask each other often as we explore ideas around business, culture, impact and personal development. This is a space where we can share some of that exploration. Here's Andy to kick off the conversation.
So we wanted to talk about an analogy that you've probably heard in Bellroy before, which is we try and take the stairs rather than the elevator. And I think first this was a random aside of a long article about a cook in the US who built a bakery business or something. And it had really resonated where there is a lot of content in the world talking about the elevator to success and how to get on the elevator to success. So whether, direct-to-consumer businesses are booming, get on the elevator, how do you pick one product, put it in one market and, pay a heap for your social media advertising and ride it to success? What's the overnight way to become the billionaire? There's a lot of content in the world saying, yes, there's a secret to success. There's a solution. You just have to do these 3 things, eat these super greens and wake up at this time and go. And for us, that is very different to the approach we believe we take and we value and we see in the world as something that just needs a bit more noise around it to counter this idea that there's a magic pill or 3 tips to overnight success or those sorts of things. So the idea that you can take a staircase to success, and that staircase you take a step at a time. As you climb more steps, you build more muscle. You have the ability to down climb a little or up climb. As you build more muscle, as you build more understanding, you might take 2 or 3 stairs at a time. You can still change the pace you take those stairs, but this idea of when you take stairs, you are more in control. There's still luck, there's still external factors, there's still many other things, but you are more in control and it is more about the journey than just the destination of success, however you define that. However, the reason we love this analogy is you can push it and pull it in many ways before it starts to break down. And so we thought it would be fun to start talking about this analogy and this idea of taking the stairs rather than the elevator and how it actually provides quite a useful framing to think about day-to-day activities and decisions. Quick overview, throw to you, Lina.
Yeah, and I kind of felt like I could go in 2 different directions. Maybe the first one is the other thing that feels really magical about this analogy is the degree to which when you're on the stairs, you can see the steps you're taking and you can see your surroundings the whole time. You can sort of look up and get some perspective. You can look down and see where you've come. But every step you take, you already can see where you're going next. And the thing about the elevator comparison is you get in and you press a floor and then the doors close and you're in a box with no feedback until the doors open again and you don't actually know what's going to come. And just to sort of like pull the analogy all the way to like the different directions that we pull it in, I think that the blindness that you get in an elevator feels like it's another very resonant part of the problem of that elevator to success story. That was sort of like one path that I thought was interesting as I was thinking about what you were saying and listening. And then the other path was that I was thinking about, it feels like, I think you were the one who first sort of said this out loud and it became more and more part of the language and we were using it all over the place. It just seemed to apply everywhere. But I feel like it was maybe about 3 years ago, probably not 4, that I sort of thought, when did Andy first say it or when did it start to feel relevant? Because I don't think this is it's been with us for, from day one. This one's more of it's felt super relevant in the past maybe 3 years, which given that we're in 23 now, that kind of puts us at the beginning of COVID, kind of interestingly. And I don't know whether that was part of why that started pinging for you. I don't know, maybe that's a question for you. Like, what do you think first brought it up?
I think that time, sort of 2018, 2019, there was a lot of, media was dominated by these success stories. You had luggage brands, you had eyewear brands, you had male trouser brands, you had all sorts of brands, and it was all about wow, how quickly can they become a unicorn, and they've had all this funding, and look at all the dollars going in. And I think we really felt like this was a dangerous game to play. Not only because you were in a box where you're recruiting so quickly, it's hard to manage culture. You're throwing external expertise at things so quickly to try and plug gaps and make those zeros appear. That it also felt like other factors were in control of where that elevator went. How many other people are hitting the floor button and it's stopping? What else is in control of that elevator? And I think we were looking at all these stories being held up as radical success stories, and they all felt a tiny bit fragile and fake.
But did you feel like, because I think I did, and maybe this is why it resonated at the time, I felt like at that time, and even a few years before, people were looking at us and sometimes wondering why we weren't taking more elevators. Like, why were we not
on Shopify
growing as quickly? Yeah, on Shopify.
Why weren't we splashing so much cash on social media advertising?
Should we have profit or not?
Why don't we radically expand our product line? Mm-hmm. Why don't we start selling all these other products that we can source out of a factory and put our logo on it?
And so I think that we'd probably come out of a few years where we'd had some success. Bellroy was growing a little bit, people were liking our stuff, and we were engaging a little bit more with the outside world, and we probably found ourselves quite often facing these questions that we just, threw out a bunch of examples of, and we could probably do heaps more, about why weren't we doing X or Y or Z. And it felt like this analogy of that, we were taking the stairs and not the elevator helped us to sort of find some breathing room to say, no, actually, that's an elevator. And there are lots and lots of problems with elevators. And that's not how we want to do things. We want to take the stairs. We want to be in control. We want to be able to pivot if we have to. But we don't want to be in a box that's moving in a direction that we just have to get on and stay there until the doors open again and deal with whatever's there when it opens. And I feel like it was kind of a breathing out and like an understanding of that's why we're not blah, 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 doing the thing,
I think that's right. And I think it wasn't front of mind for me, but absolutely, as you described that, yes, that was in response to others a fair bit. And then we had to try and justify it because the stories of folks that built things over time, that enjoyed the craft of the process and loved the journey and loved understanding it at a deep level, not just at a surface level. Those stories weren't being talked about as often back then.
No.
It wasn't.
Even now, though.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe what we're trying to do here is this could also be called the podcast of taking the stairs and not the elevator, because I think that's what we're thinking a little bit with these conversations, is that we can show some of taking the stairs.
So taking the stairs sounds a bit boring, and it sounds like it'd hurt your legs a bit more.
It's totally like it's going to hurt your legs. Exactly. And you can't do that many in a day. It burns energy and yeah.
Absolutely. So I think one other comment, just a similar analogy that we've been using recently, which I hadn't even connected how similar it is. But we've said certain decisions, you're getting on a travelator. And if you picture those travelators in airports, some of them run a long way and you're not quite sure whether it's going to finish before the gate you need to go to or not. And I think there's a lot of decisions where it's like, is this a short travelator or a long one? And is it a wide travelator or a narrow one? What sort of optionality are you giving up before you step onto that travelator? And are you actually going to zoom right past your gate and then have to backtrack? What's going to happen? And it's interesting that travelator is also being used a fair bit by us at the moment around decisions and the time frame that they will play out and the optionality that you're giving up when you make that decision.
Yes, I was actually thinking about the travelator as well as I was talking about the elevator, and thinking this is totally the same problem that we are very much at the moment not wanting to put ourselves on travelators that we're sort of stuck on for a long time. Yeah, that sounds really resonant. I'm curious to kind of dig a little bit more, if you're up for it, as to why the elevator stories get told and why they feel so much shinier, and like what can we do to actually up the value of taking the stairs and make that feel tasty and interesting and like the better thing to do, if that's what we think is the better thing to do. Like how do we make it be that taking the stairs is like the cool thing, and people get into that?
Oh, haha.
You can just answer that question perfectly.
Yeah. Here's a pre-prepared one. I think it's a great point. I think down the track we will probably talk about being willing to hold tension rather than try and dissolve it. But I think that's another conversation. I think one of the things that happen in so much discourse in modern society is this idea of a focus of goals that are shaped as an objective. I just want to reach this salary. I just want to achieve this turnover. I just want to get that house. I just want to get that car. And as we've looked into psychology research, happiness research, chasing goals that are framed as an objective, a state, an end destination, it doesn't look like it creates as fulfilling a life, because as soon as you reach the summit, it's like, now what? You know, if you're climbing Everest to spend 2 minutes on the top of the summit, is it really about reaching the summit, or is it really about climbing Everest? And I think there's just so much noise around shiny goals, and maybe one theory is because they're easier to market and there's trillions of dollars being spent on marketing. It's easier to sell someone on the vision of everyone will look at you with, envious eyes as you drive past in this shiny car, or if you can just get to this role, everything will be solved. If you think of what so many kids go through, it's like you've just got to get good marks at school so that you can get into your first choice at uni.
And then job's done.
And job's done. And of course, As soon as you're into uni, you've just got to get the good marks so you can graduate top of class. And then it turns out, shifting goalposts again, actually now you're starting at the bottom of the rung in a career, and now you've just got to get that promote. And it's just easier to sell a destination goal. And so lots of people descend to that because it gets you following along with what they want you to do. They want you to buy that car. They want you to sign up to that university. They want you to do that thing. Even when it's well-intentioned, it feels easier. And it's harder to say, actually, a bit of struggle is a good thing. That's where growth happens. And actually, you've got to really learn to be able to stop and smell the roses. You've got to learn to love each of those moments, even when they're difficult, because you realize you'll grow from this experience. It's a harder conversation to have.
And do you think it makes me think as well that, like, I agree that there's definitely like this fast marketing concept where the concept has to be communicated in like 10 seconds or 140 characters or whatever sort of fast thing it is. I wonder if, and that feels right. Like, and I wonder if also there's like this weird like ego / does it feel crappy to actually look like you didn't get it right, or you're moving slowly, or you don't know where you're going, sort of piece where it's much easier to tell the success story and like you feel protected when you do that. And you want your business to sound like it's successful, and you want to sound like you're good at your career. And so you sort of, I mean, it's called the Facebook effect, I guess, in some ways. And it was interesting to sort of have like a while ago when, as Brene Brown was sort of getting so recognized from talking about a vulnerability perspective, like one of the things about the stairs is that maybe it feels like a more vulnerable, less kind of interesting story from that perspective as well. Maybe because people don't make it interesting because they don't go sort of right at the heart of this is why this stair was hard, versus when they're talking about the elevator, they're like, nope, I'm all the way up and it's straightforward and it's sort of safer to tell. I was also thinking about like autobiographies and how sometimes they're amazing and sometimes they feel a little empty. And I think that sometimes an autobiography can be quite elevator oriented, where you just get this sense that you're not getting what was hard about that journey. And then sometimes you hear you listen to an autobiography or read one and it's like, no, actually, I get it. I get why this was hard, or I get why this was challenging.
I think just to try and make that even more concrete, we've both read Shoe Dog, the Nike story. Yeah. And what shone, I think, for both of us in the conversation, this was some years ago that we had the convo, but it didn't get easy for a long, long, long time. And actually it never got easy. Each new success revealed an upgrade in the level of challenge you could take on, but it was still hard and challenging. And funding was hard and supply was hard, and it just stayed hard for decades. And it was one of the biographies that actually had a more tangible sense of that struggle that was ongoing for years and years and years and years, rather than some of them as seen through the rosy-coloured tint of sort of hindsight, and it was all inevitable. It was always going to be a success. And that was one of the biographies that gave a sense that they never knew if it would be a success. Even as it was growing and hiring and doing all these things, it was always fragile in some way and difficult in some way, and there's always new challenges.
Yeah, totally. I was actually also thinking about Shoe Dogs when I was talking and thinking, I don't think there's ever been a published piece of work, movie, book that has well articulated how difficult it has felt at times doing Belroy. I think it so well articulates the challenge of supply and getting it right, and what if there's a quality problem. It perfectly talks about the challenges of geography and where should you be, and what are the consequences. It talks about like people are weirdly shaped, right? They're not like a perfect cardboard cutout of exactly what you need in a role. They just never are. None of us are. We're not. Nobody is. Like the people were real in the story. And so I agree. I felt like it did a good job. So that sort of makes me then think about, well, maybe for us to do a proper service to this concept, we should think about like what are examples of us taking the stairs that felt like, to be honest, and actually go into, well, what was hard? Like what are the things that have felt just super hard? That were real taking the stairs moments. I think the one that we got like so many questions on and a lot of flack about that we really defended was the one that you alluded to earlier. Should we have been on Shopify or should we develop our own system? I think that that was a question that we got a lot. Like, why aren't you on Shopify? Sorry, Shopify. We used to be on Shopify and you're amazing. And then we felt like we couldn't do geography anymore. We couldn't do multi-language. We couldn't do multi-currency. We couldn't sort of keep it all together. Did that feel hard to sort of defend for you? And like, I think we were answering those questions.
Yeah, and hard not just once, but hard for 4 years of people saying, but Shopify's getting better at this now. But can't you just simplify this whole chunk of your business and you don't have to employ as many people? Surely you're not these unique creatures that have needs that no other global commerce brand has. Like, surely there's solutions out of the box for this.
But we didn't think they were, right?
And we kept trying. our team kept properly trying to go back in and reassess it. And we tried Magento for a while. That was meant to be a hybrid where, there's a degree of platform that you can leverage. But again, we just kept running up against issues in it. And that commitment to make something bespoke, that's a big commitment in terms of resources, expertise, hiring. There's so many things that go into it for it to be bespoke. So it was something that you keep seeing the effect of it because you're hiring this many more people and projects take this long, where now Shopify has a plugin that does that automatically. So it wasn't something that you had to answer once. We had to answer it repeatedly, constantly, and we still to this day have to have sort of justification conversations around it.
But I think that feels like a really good example for us of a lot of times we would have gotten to the next floor quicker if we were just doing the other path, but we didn't. But it felt like the slow walk up the stairs left us with a thing at the end that was a better destination.
I think that's right. And I think all the way you need your own North Stars to navigate if you're going to do that. I don't think it was ever a gut feel. We had a clear sense of wanting to be a global brand, not just in one country.
Yeah.
We had a clear sense of wanting to be where customers wanted us, where they wanted to transact with us. These days it gets called omni-channel, but back then it was just, show up where customers feel most comfortable transacting. We had a sense of, do we understand technology and the pace of its evolution fast enough that we think we can stay world-class in our own tech stack and how we do it? So, Matt as a co-founder was great because he understands the ebbs and flows and movement of technology, and then the sorts of folks he brought into Bellroy also understood that at an almost philosophical level, not just a tools and tech level. And so we felt like we kept having good guides that would be able to help us do this. So I think if you're sort of choosing your own path, you do need navigation aids because you're no longer just whichever floor the elevator goes to, that's where you end up. So you have a more ability to shape and change a path, which means you need better navigation tools, which might be values. It might be clearly stated goals for the customer experience we want and the level of performance we want. It's a whole series of things. So I think it's a great example.
I reckon one of the other interesting ones that we sort of didn't deliberately choose, we 100% didn't deliberately choose, but I feel like being in Australia sort of meant there were some lifts or elevators. We call them lifts, I guess. There were some elevators that we just couldn't even get on, right? Like the only choice we had was to take the stairs. Australia just didn't have a population that was big enough that we could grow to sort of match our ambitions by just selling in Australia. And so we had to, you mentioned sort of being global, and we had to have a global perspective from the beginning because that Australia just wouldn't have had a big enough market for us to sort of experiment in niche products that we were starting in. But that was pretty tough, right? It was really tough to navigate. How do you do sales tax in like 50 countries? And how do you import and how do you supply product? And I think also it felt like at the time we were asking ourselves the question, did we bring in too much complexity too early? And maybe that's another podcast topic as well, right? Like at what point should a business bring in complexity? But were we bringing in complexity too early for the size that we were? But we sort of didn't have much choice in some ways to be able to get access to the market that we wanted to have access to. And that was sort of a bit of a natural taking the stairs. And I think sometimes we were always looking at the US market especially, and sort of equivalent businesses to us that were starting in the US and comparing ourselves to them. And I think feeling a little, jealous isn't necessarily the right word, but sort of watching the ease with which they had access to customers one product in one market on one sales channel, and you could create $100 million business. And that felt very tasty. But I think we've come to believe that perhaps that's not the thing that builds resilience and longevity for a business.
Yeah. And this gets back to like almost how do you create enough desire and motivation to take the harder route? And it's so how can you actually now celebrate? So direct to consumers, we said those sort of businesses seem to be winning all the awards for growth and status and all those things. And they've had a hard time of it in the product space over the last 6 months and 12 months. And that exposure to, one product, one market, one channel, that resilience we valued, now you can see the benefits of it, where we're still growing strongly, we're still doing those things, and some of these other companies are having a much harder time of it. And that is a hard one where you just have to sort of hold the course, and you're still checking, you're still looking for feedback that holding the course is the sensible thing to do. But without those sense of how do trend cycles work, how do economic cycles work, it might have been easier to think, well, this is the new way, this replaces all the old ways, and this is now everything. But when you look through a historical lens, you realize most things come in ebbs and flows, and even though there might be an upward trajectory, there'll still be cycles. And so how do we balance all our other goals with that and still feel like it's a desirable course to take up the stairs?
Yes. And so another real challenge, I think, that perhaps external to Bellroy listeners would be, facing, is that if you need funding or if you need investment, one problem that you can face is that you are at any point in time being compared to businesses who are taking the elevator. And you're talking, Andy, about how do you create the impetus to take the stairs. And when you're in sort of a fundraising landscape where the market is comparing you against, this month or this 6 months or this year, this business did this thing, that can be a really difficult thing to resist. And I guess it sort of turns up in how much do you chase a business model that is legible out in the world versus how much do you go with a business model that builds your particular business well. And that's a real tension, I think, that it's probably a good, that feels like a bit of a summary of the examples that we've sort of given there of needing to be global, given that we're in Australia, or building our own systems versus Shopify, that's very much us not following the standard legible template, but making a decision to have to build Bellroy in the way that we felt was right.
I think that's right. And even though something I said earlier was pointing a bit at this, it's like if you're not following the cookie cutter approach, if you're not following the algorithm that every investor wants you to follow, you need your own navigation tools. And so can you build things from first principles? It's not really first principles. They're still derived principles. We inherit all sorts of views and lenses and we build upon them. But you need some other way to say, here's what we believe is a good model. Here's what we believe is a good customer experience, rather than just taking the formulas that are passed across the table to you. It's like you need your own navigation tools. And again, that's harder because it means you've got to read widely, you've got to talk widely, you've got to self-reflect, you've got to team reflect, you've got to debrief, you've got to keep tuning the navigation aids that you're using to describe your own path and journey.
Yeah, and keep getting it wrong.
Course correct as you go.
I don't know. Was that a good dive into taking the stairs versus the elevator?
Hopefully. I think there's other spots we can push it. But I think it reflects on how much you're looking to build skills and expertise in-house versus externally, how much you're dependent on other agencies or other service providers to do things. I think it does change a lot the resilience of your business. Hopefully there's been a bit of a sense for that as we've talked. And it's not enough just to reject what everyone else is doing. You actually have to build your own maps and your own navigation aids to actually have a counter to just doing the formula that everyone else is pursuing. But hopefully that gives a bit of a sense of how we think about this analogy, and also how flexible it can be in just many types of conversations.
Yeah, it's a good distillation of a complicated concept that for us now, when we say, yeah, that's taking the stairs, we know what that means, and maybe that'll be useful for others as well. Or hopefully when we say it, people will know what we're talking about a little bit. Cool. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. You can find details and relevant links in the show notes. We've almost certainly missed something. If you have a perspective that you think would complement our thinking in this space, or a topic we should explore, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us questions or comments in the Q&A section on Spotify, or you can email us at podcast@bellroy.com. Bye for now.